Good morning to you fine folks. The crowd is thinning out. I know Mr. Trent mentioned some from illness. The rest knew I was going to speak today. So that's how it goes. Some more useless, well, it's not useless information, but it's information that you just can't do without. At the end of today, it will be approximately 715 years into the millennium. Genesis 1:1, the very first words of the Bible. Moses was inspired to write, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Physical, material things came into being. And in Ecclesiastes 1:4, King Solomon was inspired to write, "One generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever." So, how old is the earth? Well, we really don't know. Oh, the so-called great minds, these folks who have a PhD in science, who has let their education run amok, the ones who pilot high and deep, will tell you they know. But they don't know. They really don't know. They only have a theory. And a theory is not a fact. It is an educated guess at the best. However, according to the Bible and God, this earth was created when the rest of the universe was created. And how long is that? Again, we don't know, do we? It may be millions or even billions of years old. The earth has been here for a long, long time, folks. And evidently, it's going to be here for a long time in the future. Maybe forever. We just don't know. But the earth has not always been or existed in the form which we see around us today. Genesis 1, verse 2, we read, "And the earth was or became without form and void." It was an empty place, so to speak. It was vacant. No life here. It says, "And darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." So evidently, the earth was completely covered with water and also covered in complete darkness. Our speculation is it became that way because of Satan's attempt to overthrow God's throne. But it was a different age then than what it was when God placed humanity on the earth. Now, we've dug up skeletons of all these great dinosaurs which may have existed in an age before the earth came without form and void. We really don't know. Again, some of these folks who have a PhD in science, and again, I'm not against education, folks. I wish that I had more education than I do. I wish that I could have went on to school, but my parents couldn't afford to send me. Some of these folks who have let their education run amok, anything that they can't explain by physical means, well, the aliens did it. The aliens must have done it. Oh boy. But they really don't know. They can only guess how old this earth is, and anybody can guess. There's an old saying that anybody who has a watch that doesn't run can tell you the right time twice a day. And that's true. So they just guess. A lot of what they say and would like us to believe is only speculation. Chapter 3 and 4 here in Genesis 1. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. The moment God spoke these words, a new age came into existence, apart from the ages of the past. And we don't know how many ages existed. Different ages existed before this. The age of total darkness was instantly gone, and there was a new age of light and darkness. In other words, God refurbished the face of this earth. Verse 5, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and morning were the first day. So time began as we know it today. Time started then as we know it today. Verse 6, and God said, "Let there be a firmament, or an expansion, in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." So God divided the waters here. There was water on the earth, and there was water above the earth. There was clouds and moisture in the sky, as we would say. And God called this expansion of water above the heaven. Verse 8 and verse 9 here, we see that he gathered all the water on the earth in one place, and dry land appeared. In verse 11 and 12, God spoke the word. He just said the word. And the earth brought forth grass and herbs and fruit-bearing trees, bearing seed after their own kind. There was thousands of different kinds of vegetation that God created like that in an instant. Verse 13 through 18 tells us God hung the sun and the moon, the sun to give light by day and the moon to give light by night. And it says in verse 14, they were also given to us, excuse me, that we might tell time. He gave them to us that we could separate the years and the months and so forth. Without the moon, we would not know when God's holy days were. Without the sun, we wouldn't know what day the Sabbath was. So he gave them to us to tell time by. As we read on, we see the creation of all the animals on the earth. And at last, he created man. Male and female, he created them in his own image, in his own likeness. Not only in the physical form did he create man in his likeness, but he created us with a mental capacity, or a mental capacity like God and Christ have. And I mean by that, the capacity to reason and to think and to make choices. That is part of God's image that he gave to us. And as we read on, we see the creation. Well, I'm sorry. We see this transformation of the earth being completely underwater and surrounded by total darkness and lifelessness, no life, into a world of light, teeming with all kinds of different life, flesh and vegetation. A complete new age had arrived when God brought this into being. A complete new age from what the earth was. Now, we all know the story of Adam and Eve, the first man and first woman to occupy the earth. At least they were the first man and woman as we know humanity today. For they were made in the image of God. And most of our parents told us this story as little children. We know this story. Now, we don't know what went on in the past ages of the earth. And we really don't know how many ages has passed on this earth that I've already mentioned that. We don't know how many ages this world has gone through up to this point in time. We know that Adam and Eve, they chose the wrong tree. They went down the wrong path of life by deciding what was right and what was wrong for themselves. They chose the wrong course of life. Of course, by, with a little persuasion from the devil, of course. But they ate of the wrong tree. Or rather, they chose to do their things their way instead of God's way, like we have chosen today. And we have followed in their footsteps ever since. Genesis 6, verse 5. Now God saw that the wickedness or the violence of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continuously. Now, the word imagination here is from the Hebrew word Y-E-T-S-E-R, pronounced yaster, as the translators have translated it here. But it means not only their imagination or what they thought in their mind, but it means that their whole purpose and their desires and their intent was to do evil. That's all they thought of. That was what was continuously on their minds. Again, do we know of any age like that? Well, we're living in one, aren't we? Verse 6, and it repented. Or rather, the Lord was sorry that he had created man on the earth. It says it grieved him at his heart. A mere 1,650 years, somewhere thereabouts, give or take a few years, mankind had become totally corrupt, with the exception of one man and his family within this new age. Verse 11 tells us the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And verse 12 tells us all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. A mere 1,650 years. That is, with the exception of Noah and his family. A very short time, a very short age we see here. And mankind had corrupted themselves. One family out of maybe millions of people on the earth at that time. One man and his family. So what did the Lord decide to do? We all know the story. Verse 13 here in Genesis 6. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them. Or rather, said he would destroy them from the earth. Another age was about to come to the earth. And that the old age, Noah's age, was about to pass. And again, it was about to pass because of violence. Once again, violence is what has destroyed the past ages of this earth. And it was about to pass again. This time, not because of the sins of spirit beings, but because of the sins of physical human beings. And that is what is going to bring about the devastation of the age which you and I live in today. Sin, that's what's going to destroy this age. Well, we all know the story of the great flood. We were taught that also as little children. Noah built this great ship, or ark, as it was called. He and his wife, his sons, and their wives, and all those animals went into the ark. And the Lord, it said, shut the door. Then that expansion of water we read about in the first chapter of Genesis came back together. The water came from the skies, and the waters came up out of the earth. For 40 days it did that. And the earth was once again covered with water. And all flesh was destroyed, with the exception of Noah and his immediate family and the fish in the sea. How, this age, like the preceding ages of the past, had become to an end because of sin and wickedness and violence. And this age, the very age we live in, has become like all the ages of the past. The imaginations and thoughts of wicked spirits and mankind is to only do evil continuously. And it's getting worse, folks. And a lot of us here in the United States, we don't realize how bad it really is. We see all the violence here in our own nation, but go to some of these third world countries, folks, and we would be astounded at what is going on. In the last 114 years, which brings us up to this present time, it has been estimated that over 150 million people have died at the hands of their fellow man in wars, in concentration camps, and by high explosives. And that number is increasing every day, rapidly every day. Wherever man goes, he leaves a trail of blood, the blood of his fellow human beings. The prophet Isaiah puts it this way, Isaiah 59, 6 and 7. He says, their works are works of iniquity, and the acts of violence is in their hands. Their feet run to do evil, and they make haste to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are thoughts of iniquity. Wasting and destruction are in their paths. Mankind has never known the true way to peace. And all of this is brought on by the influence of Satan, the first being, to ever sin, as far as we know. But he has brought all this sin upon the world and in the world. Over in the New Testament, Romans 3, verses 10 through 18, the Apostle Paul here is quoting from the Old Testament. He says, as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understands. There is none that seeks after God. They are all gone out of the way. They are altogether become unprofitable. There is none that does good. No, not one, he says. Their throat is like an open grave. With their tongues they use deceit. The poison of asp is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. And that's true, folks. Just look around us. People don't fear God. They have no respect for God whatsoever. They're doing things their own way, just like Satan tried to do things his own way. That's what got him kicked out of heaven. In this age of mankind, the age in which we now live, mankind simply does not know the way to peace. Apart from God, he is incapable of bringing about peace. And none of his attempts has ever worked. After World War I, there was a League of Nations, I believe they called it. After World War II, we now have the United Nations. But none of them have the answer. None has the answer whatsoever. And there's a reason for this. Mankind is not willing to include God and God's will into his thinking and his reasoning and his government. And what happens, when mankind rejects God? Paul gives us the answer. Again, in Romans 1:28. He says, even as they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, and to do those things which are not convenient or fitting, or rather improper conduct. And back in verses 21-27, same chapter, Paul basically says here, God gave them up to the lust of their hearts, to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies, among themselves in the acts of homosexuality, lesbianism, and so forth, bestiality. And then in verse 29-31, Paul describes this age, our age, the age we live in. Being filled with unrighteousness, he says, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, and maliciousness, full of envy, murder, which is murder is the breaking of the sixth commandment, and debate, he says. People are constantly arguing all the time. Turn on your TV and flip to any news channel that you want to. The journalists are sitting there debating what's going on in the world, arguing back and forth. The president and all of Congress are debating back and forth. All the politicians are arguing, debating one another, debate. And nothing profitable ever comes about. Deceit, Paul says, malignity, whispers, gossips and scandals, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, which is the breaking of the fifth commandment. That's the age we live in today. This age, the age that God created when Noah came out of the ark and walked down the mountain. But this is what happens when God cuts himself, when man cuts himself off from God. And I'm going to say that again. This is what happens when mankind cuts himself off from God. For this is his doing. This is our doing. Mankind's doing, not God's. It's not God's fault, but everybody wants to blame God. Everybody wants to blame everything on God. And these philosophers of science, the pilot high and deepers, they try to explain all our immorality away. Homosexuality, lesbianism is just a natural attribute in some people, they say. And some people are just born in the wrong body. They're just born that way. Hogwash. God says it is an abomination, folks. The Pilate high and deepers want to portray themselves to the world as being wiser than God. They want to explain all their sins as being rational. Paul tells us here in verse 22 of Romans 1, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. And back up in verse 21, he also says, for although they knew God, they knew about God, but they didn't honor God. They did not honor him as God or give thanks unto him. But they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. That's true. That's the people we got running this age that we live in. Now, I don't know if some of you probably has watched this program on TV. It's on one of the history channels, I believe, called Ancient Aliens. Ancient Aliens is the name of the program. And they show all these huge buildings that's been built on the earth. The pyramids of Giza. And all these huge structures down in South America. There's one particularly that comes to mind is way high on a mountain. And the stones weighing tons are put together. It looks like a jigsaw puzzle. It looks like they've just been melted and formed into place. And since the Pilate high and deepers, they can't figure this out. So it must have been done by the aliens. The aliens did it. They cannot accept that there was an age which knew more, evidently, than they did. They can't accept that. Oh, a man with a wooden mallet and a chicken bone for a chisel couldn't have done that. Well, no, he couldn't. He had something besides a mallet and a chicken bone, people. They say, oh, but we can't find their tools that they had. Well, they can't find the mallet and the chicken bone either. They can't accept anything that they can't explain. Over in Galatians 5:19 through 21, Paul says this about humanity. And I'm going to read this from the New English Bible version or translation. It says, anyone can see the kind of behavior that belongs to the lower nature. And I think the King James says works of the flesh. But it says fornication, impurity, indecency, idolatry, and sorcery, quarrels, a contentious temper, envy, fits of rage, selfish ambitions, dissensions, people who has the party spirit, jealousies, bouts of drinking, orgies, and the like. He says, as I've told you before, those who do these things will not enter the kingdom of God. But that explains our age today, the age that we live in. We have arrived at the time in this age where our nature has just become just like those people before the flood. We have arrived at that point. And what did God do to those people right before the flood? He wiped them off of the face of the earth. Can the people of this age expect any better? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. For a mind void of God and His laws is a mind void of moral judgment. And a man apart from God is hopelessly lost. A man who is separated from God, knowingly or otherwise, is linked to the mind of Satan. You either have God's mind or you have the mind of Satan. There's no in between. No in between. We see in 2 Corinthians 4:4. Satan is the god of this world. That's what it says. Satan is the god of this age. And his influence is everywhere. It's everywhere. He's like Speedy Gonzales. He's everywhere. He's everywhere. He has blinded the minds of mankind to the truth of God. So the truth of God appears as foolishness to a spiritually darkened mind. God's laws are foolish to Satan. Therefore, they are foolish to those who are influenced by Satan's nature. There is a way which seems right to man, but it is actually the way of Satan. And the people who follow will certainly end in destruction. Who follows that way will end in destruction. And mankind separated from God will eventually become extinct. We will kill ourselves off, down to the last man. But I have some good news for you folks. God is not going to let that happen. The Bible tells us that He's not going to let that happen. This age may not be God's time, but there is a new age coming. There's another age coming besides the one we live in. The age we live in today will also pass away, like all the other ages before us. Just as the age before the flood, and the age before that, and who knows how many ages before the creation as we know it. We don't know. God doesn't tell us. This age, as I said, may be Satan's age, but there's a new age coming. And this new age coming, rest assured, will be the age of Jesus Christ. It will be an age of 1,000 years, what we are keeping here this week. It will be 1,000 years of the government of God engulfing the whole world without the influence of Satan the devil. This is what the Feast of Tabernacles is about. Man left to himself would certainly become extinct. But God, as I said, is not going to let that happen. God has a great plan for humanity, and He will intervene. He created mankind for a great purpose, and He will bring that plan about to fruition. A new age is coming, and it will bring about universal peace, and the whole world will know what true righteousness is all about. Mr. Trent and I were talking the other day how that you and I are living in a transition period, a period of transition from one age to the next. Even the old ministers in the old church, in the short space of time of no more than 50 or 60 years, they did not live in the evil that you and I do today in that short period of time. In that short space of time, the world has increased to an overwhelming state of evil, it seems. Oh, I know there was Adolf Hitler, yes. And what he did was evil, totally evil. But what he did could be pinpointed. Today, the whole world is in a state of evil, like we've never seen before. Evil is everywhere. Everywhere you look. Homosexuality is rampant. It is accepted as the norm and is legal, or it's been legalized by all the laws of the land. When the terrorists behead our own citizens, it hardly ruffles our feathers. When some baby is abducted or little child raped and murdered, we don't think much about it. We've become so hardened to the evil in this world. And yes, even in the church as well. When I was a young man growing up in Southwest Virginia, we never locked our doors. Even if we went on a trip and was gone 3 or 4 days, we never locked the door. The doors had locks on them. We probably didn't even know where the key was because we never used them. And when we came home, everything was just like we left it. Nobody in the community bothered anything that belonged to someone else. Just wasn't that way. We didn't have to worry about anybody stealing anything. Of course, if they came to our house, they would probably had to left us something. But we were so poor. But we didn't know we were poor. For we always had what we needed. Not what we wanted all the time, but we had what we needed. God always provided because our mother obeyed the laws of God to the best of her ability. And she taught us children. And looking back, I can see God had his hand in our lives. Can you do that today? Can you walk off and leave your house unlocked? Not even in the little rural community where I was brought up. Leave your doors unlocked and you will come back to an empty house. That's just the way it is today in this age. My mother used to go and visit the neighbor lady who lived about a mile down the road. And sometimes it would be after dark before she came back. She'd walk that stretch of highway. She didn't have to worry about anybody bothering her. A woman by herself today would not dare do that. For if she did, she would be risking her very life. Now, we didn't have air conditioning back then either. So during the hot summer nights, my dad, he had this little cot he slept on in front of the living room door. He would open both doors so there would be a breeze come through the house to keep him cool. Nothing between him and the great outdoors but a piece of screen wire. He had nothing to fear. Would you sleep like that today? I wouldn't sleep a wink. I'd be afraid somebody'd reach in there and grab me, and they probably would. It's a different world, folks. And that's just a short space of time. Well, folks, this present evil world or age is destined to pass into history, like all the rest of the ages before it. And a new age will come. I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to that new age. The dawning of this new age will begin at the second coming of Jesus Christ. And that is what this evil world needs. It needs the leadership of God. Nothing else will ever work. Nothing mankind has to offer will work. All that can save humanity from ourselves is God Almighty. Then that is what this Feast of Tabernacles represents. The coming of Christ to rule this world in truth and righteousness. And it will be the age of Christ. In Matthew 24, verse 3, the disciples asked Jesus, "What shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of this world or age?" And then Jesus goes on to tell them of all these great signs which would come to pass right before his coming. And we are seeing some of those signs even today. We see false Christ. We see false prophets. We see nations rising up against nations. We see famines in many of these third world countries. And there's even hunger, believe it or not, in this nation. There's people that goes hungry even here. And we see people in other countries being persecuted for carrying the name of Christ. And eventually we will see that here too. It's coming, folks. We might as well brace ourselves for it. Jesus said many would be offended. They would betray one another, and that they would hate one another. That's true. You can't say anything or do anything today without you offend somebody else. And Jesus said those are the only beginning of sorrows. The worst is yet to come. And only when all of these events come together will this new age begin. And only through the return of Christ can this new age become a reality. But Christ never came in their generation, did he? They all died not receiving the promise. This present evil age did not end in the first century. Many generations have passed since then. Paul tells us in Hebrews 11, 39 and 40, and all of these people, speaking of the people who died, obtained a good report through faith, but they received not the promise. God having provided some better thing for us, that they, the ones that have already died without us, should not be made perfect. So they're there, lying in the grave, waiting on us, waiting on that our change may take place together with theirs. But you know, when Christ comes, the world is not going to accept him. The nations of this world is not going to want to be ruled by God. For in accepting the rule of God, the leaders of the governments here on this earth, in this age, they would have to give up their power and their riches and whatever else their egos has led them to do. They're not going to accept Christ's leadership, and they will come and fight against him. It's hard to believe, but they will. Matthew 16:27 tells us, however, the Son of Man, or Jesus Christ, shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels. And then in Thessalonians 4:16 through 17 tells us, the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. And then in verse 17, we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the cloud to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. So Christ is coming with a great host of angels, and us as well, the first fruits. And he's going to set his feet down on the Mount of Olives, the very place he left from. And we will fight against those powers who are under the influence of Satan, and we will defeat them. Only then can this new age come into being. Now, over in Zechariah 14, which is very familiar scripture to all of us, it describes this new age which is about to come. Let's just go over there a minute. Zechariah, if I can find it. I've lost all my half of my little tabs off my Bible here. Zechariah 14. It describes this new age which is coming. Verse 3 and 4. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against these nations which are going to fight against him. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fought in the day of battle. And his feet shall stand in that very day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof towards the east and towards the west. And there shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove towards the north, and the other half towards the south. Then in verse 12, and this shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite all these people who come up to fight against him. Their flesh shall consume away, it says, while they stand on their feet. Their eyes shall consume away in their sockets, and their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongues shall consume away in their mouth. The Lord is going to literally dissolve these people. He's going to dissolve these armies that come up to fight against him. He's going to dissolve them like a lump of sugar in a hot cup of coffee. They're just going to melt away. And then back in verse 9 here, after all this happened, it says, and then the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day there shall be one Lord, and his name one. There's a new age coming, folks. Now let's go to verse 16 here, Zechariah 14. Now, I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but I'm trying to place it all in order for you, in the right time sequence. As we come to verse 16, this is a later time after Christ has fully established his government in this new age. Verse 16. And it shall come to pass that every one that is left of all the nations which came up against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year and worship the King and the Lord of hosts and keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So evidently Christ did not kill all those people which came up to fight against him. However, the ones that were left finally got the message. Or at least most of them did. In verse 17 it says, and who will not come up of the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, upon them there shall be no rain. Well, as we all know, if you have no rain, you have no food. It's amazing that some people, that what some people has to go through before they will accept the truth. But eventually, it says here, they will come around and learn God's ways. And this new age to come, represented by the days that we're keeping this week. Eventually, however, there will be at last peace and harmony here on the earth in this new age to come. Ezekiel 38:11 tells us people will dwell in unwalled villages. They will be at rest. There will be no more wars. And everyone will dwell safely in peace. Something hard to imagine for us living in this age, isn't it? Hard to imagine. Well, how can this come about? How can this be? Revelation 20:1-3 tells us how this can come about. Tells us that Satan, who is a god of this world, according to 2 Corinthians 4:4 there, he will be bound for this entire 1,000-year period. His influence will be removed from mankind, and the Spirit of God will flow out into human society and lead mankind down the right paths. And something that's always amazed me is that after 1,000 years, after this 1,000-year period of peace and safety and prosperity, Satan is going once again to be released and be allowed to go out and have influence on human society. Now, I understand the reason for this, and I'm not going to get into that today, but that shows you how powerful Satan is. After 1,000 years of Christ's rule of peace and prosperity, he's going to once again deceive these nations to come up again to Jerusalem and fight against Christ again. He's the very headquarters of Christ. And they're going to try to overthrow the throne of God here on this earth. Satan knows his fate, yet he will try to cause problems for his Creator to the very end. That's amazing to think of a mind that is so warped. But this binding of Satan is one of the chief things which will make this new age possible. Jesus will establish his headquarters at Jerusalem, and it will be his headquarters for 1,000 years, and maybe beyond that. We've already seen in Zechariah 14, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which lies before Jerusalem on the east. Then in the book of Micah, Micah describes his kingdom in detail. Micah 4, 1 and 2. And let's read that also. I didn't write that down. But in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the Lord's house of the Lord shall be established in top of the mountains. And it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. And many nations shall come and say, Come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, and to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us his ways. For the law shall go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Jerusalem will become the focal point of all the governments on the earth, and Christ shall reign as King of Kings in this new age. He will be benevolent, but yet a firm leader of all mankind. He will not be a tyrant as some leaders are today. Yet the whole world will know he's in charge. He will have the power to control all situations. And you and I are going to have a part in that as well. It's going to be a wonderful new age like this world has never seen in the past. Mankind will experience for the first time the incredible gentleness and compassion of a loving Savior. Isaiah puts it this way, speaking prophetically of Jerusalem, a city which has seen nothing but war, century after century, and bloodshed. Isaiah 40, 1 and 2. He says, comfort you, my people, says your Lord, or says your God. Speak you comfortably to Jerusalem, and cry unto her that her warfare is accomplished, or ended, rather, that her iniquity is pardoned. This millennial rest will be 1,000-year Sabbath for mankind. It will be a time of rebuilding and restoring this earth, and restoring the awful damage that is left by 6,000 years of the misrule of mankind. Christ will rule with great strength, yet his government will have compassion. He will have power, but at the same time, gentleness. He will have all authority, but he will not be a tyrant. The world has never experienced this kind of government. It will truly be a new age for mankind. God's light will disperse the darkness left by a world that has been ruled by Satan for so long. Isaiah 59:8 tells us, mankind today does not know the way of peace, and that's true. But following the arrival of Jesus Christ, the resurrection of the first fruits, and the binding of Satan, a new age will come to this old war-battered world. Something hard for us to imagine. And God will bring about the restitution of all things. God's government will be restored to the earth, and peace will surround the whole globe, the whole world. This old world has seen many ages in its lifetime, and we truly don't know how old that is, and we really truly don't know how many ages it has gone through. As I mentioned before, we know there was an age when dinosaurs roamed the earth. Scientists, they've spent billions of dollars of other people's money digging up their bones and speculating on what that age might have been like. And now today, they go out and they try to dig up every dead body they can find. Examine them piece by piece. Let those people rest. They were buried, let them stay there. They want to dig up everybody they can find and dissect them, or what's left of them. Well, we know according to Scripture, at one time before the creation of mankind, as we know him today, there was an age when the world was covered in water and total darkness. We've read about the age before the flood and the evil of mankind. We are now living in the age after the flood. And again, we are living in a world of evil. All the ages we know of and have information on were ages of evil. And the reason for that is Satan has always been around. But the age to come will be an age where there is no evil, something this world has never experienced, as far as we know. And you and I have the opportunity, folks, to get in on the ground floor of that. I mean, that's awesome. God's government is a cooperation, so to speak. It will cooperate. Each facet of God's government will cooperate with the other one. Nobody cooperates in this world, in this age. No part of our government cooperates with the other one. If it did, things would be running a little smoother. It will be a co-op or corporation of all family members will have an office there. Every office will be filled by a family member, and it will run smoothly. So I leave you with a question. How bad do you want it? How bad do you want to be a spirit being in this new age to come? I know we all suffer to one degree or other in this world, and some of us suffer to a greater degree than others. But hang on, folks. Endure until the end, if you possibly can, because help is on the way.